Hi, so I'm Armor, so I'm a DarkFi art director. So if you're not familiar with DarkFi, it's basically an L1 focused on uh, anonymity and like trying to like bring smart contracts, but anonymously. All right, so this talk is gonna focus on the optics of lunar punk and mostly the dark forest. So. All right, so I would say that this talk is some kind of follow-up to the article by my colleague Rachel Rose O'Leary named Memetic Warfare. So if you haven't read this article, essentially it summarizes the idea that memetic, memes around privacy are infected by an anti-meme which frames privacy as suspicious. And so she proposes to move from this like reactive privacy vision, which also focuses on this idea of like defense, to a more like proactive and generative, anonymous zones. So in that sense, we're like focused on the means. Focused on the end rather than the means, meaning that like privacy, like the point of privacy is sovereignty, right? So that's also like where our slogan in DarkFi is anonymous, uncensored, sovereign, and the last part is sovereign, because that's what these tools are about. Um, All right, so basically the promise of the cypherpunks has been delayed. And we had, like the beginning of the internet and the beginning of crypto, and in both cases, basically we've been, like taken over with, by institutions which essentially sterilized the space and, rendered it toothless. But actually, like we need to stay true to this idea of independence of cypherspace. So the way I see this is that anonymity solves two problems. Like one of them is, the prison of peer pressure. Like that's the way you just end up like not even being able to like, create new ideas. But it's also, surveillance also creates a certain like enclosure of space. That's what we can, like see with like, current, social media slop, etc. And so the idea is like we need to like bring back this capacity for what's called in in ecology vagility, which is simply the capacity for an organism to move in any direction. And so we are just like born just in time to be in these like uncompromised free hyperspaces, essentially, that are rendered possible to thanks to anonymous engineering. Okay, so yeah, basically, this is what this talk is going to talk about, like the vision of the dark forest discourse, and how we can like represent it aesthetically speaking. All right, so basically, the first thing that comes to mind when you think about cypherpunk is whether the hood or the balaclava, and they are like symbols of like old cypherpunk. So you're like an individual protecting oneself in a hostile environment, for example, like a city with like lots of CCTV, stuff like that. And so this aesthetic is about hiding from a system, but in that sense, it's like reinforces the power of the surveillance state by making the central focus, this idea of like, oh, I have to like hide from it. Okay, so instead we shift to a representation of a desirable future based on the metaphor of the dark forest. So it has many different meanings, but in DarkFi we use this as that surveillance is essentially a desert that's destroying any possibility of creating alternative future, and so basically I would say that the dark forest could be seen not as a singular but as a plural. So it's like dark forests with an S. All right. So coming back on the question of the balaclava, and these would be essentially like the aesthetics of fear, and I wouldn't dismiss completely fear. I think actually you should distinguish fear between two different sides of this. So there's a certain like learned helplessness of fear, which is like the fear of the surveillance systems essentially, which just like brings to a nihilistic approach. But on the other hand, there's like an inner fear of the necessity of overcoming these systems and moving away from our zone of comfort and taking a leap, entering the dark forest. Okay, so basically the idea is that the dark forest should be seen as a vision from the outside, right? Like the dark forest is dark to prying eyes, but actually, when you enter the forest, it's teeming with life. It's intense, complex, it's mysterious, and so actually, I'm not sure. Yeah, we can barely read that. Can you read this? Actually, I guess so. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so as defined by Ernst Junger, it's both cozy and uncanny. But so yeah. So I think the main point I want to make here is that the dark forest is the protection. In that sense, the balaclava or the hood expands to the collective level. This place isn't hostile. When you enter this space, you're protected, and you can create, if you want to, a temporary identity. But yeah, I think that's the main point that I want to make in this presentation, is that the protection, moves from the individual to the collective, and that the aesthetics should actually, reflect that. Okay, so I've noted down a few concept. Oh my God, the image is chopped. So yeah, essentially. So yeah, it has to, it's like affirmative, it's like very colorful also. I like this concept of also archaeofuturism. So it's like, mixing, ancient traditions with like, new technology. Embracing, essentially like, life's organic forms. A certain like affirmative humanism, and like the importance of like nature essentially, because what's the quote again? That nature smiles on encryption, and so I think it's important to like revere and to embrace that also, like visually. Okay, so just that's like a collage of like like all the characters that you can find essentially, like the dark forest. So you have like the obviously some miladies, Nausicaa, like a bunch of like pagan witches and druids, Lane, the Agorist Pepe, all that stuff. And obviously Alien also, because if you're in the uncanny, then you need, you will always also like find like some kind of like unknown life, and that's where like the mystery of the dark forest also, like comes in. How much time do I have? Okay, well, I'll just keep talking. All right, so okay, that's good. Okay, so how does that translate into our design? Okay, Okay, that's completely chopped. Well, that's fine. Okay, so this is actually our app named DarkRC. So it's like a completely anonymous chat. You can, easily download it. And basically, we're, trying to like move away from, material design and all this like very bland design and just go into like something, experimental and also maximalist. Try to like also like bring back the promise of like the late 90s when it comes to some kind of like maximalist design. Actually, this is the background of the chat is actually animated. All right, that's the QR code. And otherwise, you can easily find it on, if you look for DarkFi on Codeberg, you will also have will easily find the release. Oh, and oops. And yeah, and so basically for now, this is just a chat, but then, the plan is to actually implement this also with our, our Anon DAO framework, obviously a wallet, because DarkFi is an L1. And yeah, like basically, this is like fully customizable. So yeah, that's like basically a concept art or like, what's coming essentially. And yeah, that's it. All right.